Huang Yicheng was there. The night, hundreds of residents took to the streets of Shanghai in defiance against China's zero-COVID policy. He's still trembling when he recalls the horror.
非常恐惧啊，非常恐惧。然后大概在示威1个多小时后被逮捕了，然后有非常非常多的人被逮捕了，因为没有给我们戴手铐。然后在别的示威者被袭击的时候，我成功的从大巴上逃跑了。然后在一个白人的帮助下，我从示威现场逃脱这个警察的包围圈。
The 27-year-old school teacher was part of the so-called white paper protests in November last year, when the public resentment of the harsh policy erupted across the country. People holding blank sheets of white papers to bypass censorship as a symbol of anti-lockdown protests and discontent.
就是因为在封城当中觉得忍无可忍，生活没有了尊严，那么没有办法去买菜不能出门买菜，你就一直被关在楼里头以及每天的高音喇叭不停地喊这个高音喇叭，做核酸，做核酸，做核酸，就是每天重复10个小时以上的这高音喇叭做核酸，给你的这种精神带来的那种冲击感，还有那种非常极度压抑的感觉。
Fearing repercussions, Yicheng fled to Germany earlier this year and has been calling on the Chinese government to release the detainees. Weeks after the mass protests in early December, the Chinese government abruptly scrapped the zero-COVID policy, along with mass testing and daily case reports.
Yeah, I think this is a combination of government willingness to reopen, but more about each resident's preference, because the economy was really in a bad shape at that time. No one could afford to be locked down anytime more. So that's why I think this is a collective decision making.
Within several weeks, the virus ripped through the nation, infecting 80% of the population of 1.4 billion people. Hospitals are under huge strain, stadiums turned into fever clinics, and crematoriums overwhelmed with bodies. But the official death toll for the first 2 months after the end of zero COVID was just above 83,000 people.
Yeah, I think epidemiologists will agree this is undercount, because for any government, when you measure something during the crisis, you may undercount some casualties. But the question is how large this undercount may be.
Some modeling suggests that COVID wave killed between 1 and 1.5 million Chinese people. But the country's lack of transparency has made it hard to verify.
So in other words, China would say that if they had opened much earlier, the casualty would be much higher. So they were trying to use a containment strategy to mitigate the transmission, reduce the casualty until the virus becoming milder, then they lift those measures.
In February, the Chinese Communist Party leaders declared a major decisive victory in combating the virus.
We believe that with our leadership and the cooperation of the Chinese people, our fight against COVID-19 will be successful.
And it's already written in history textbooks.
Our country always puts the people and their lives first, effectively protected the people's lives and health, and achieved major positive results in coordinating COVID-19 response with economic and social development.
While China seems to have moved on from the pandemic, the quest to trace the origins of the virus isn't going anywhere. A review by the New York Times of a dozen retracted papers found Beijing's censorship campaign has targeted international journals and scientific databases, shaking the very foundations of the shared scientific knowledge.
My colleague and I found that there was a concerted effort to crack down on all kinds of scientific research in China early in the pandemic. Scientists withholding data from key international databases, scientists withdrawing data from those databases, and then also data in in submissions to scientific journals actually being changed after submission.
The Chinese officials rejected such criticism and called those charges intolerable. And China's National Bureau of Disease Control says the country did not conceal any cases, samples, and their test results when collaborating with the WHO. But Mara Wiesendahl says China's crackdown on information has stymied efforts to understand the virus.
The vast majority of cases at that time had happened in China. And there was a lot that we could have learned about it, not just about the origin of the virus, but also about how to treat people, very basic elements of how this virus worked. And that was lost with this crackdown.